again, right? So it's nice to spend a morning, where, and so the best way to describe our walk is to go back in time to where all of it actually began. Okay, so what I want you to do is just look around, and you see the hill, the ridge. You can barely see it now, right? So imagine arriving here, about 3,000 years ago, right? And from the valley rim, not being able to approach the Swayambhu hill because all of this would have been water. Okay, so even today, I want you to look across, the rain, and see there is no place, for the water to escape, except, at the gorge at the southern end of the valley, where a deep gorge has been cut, and so the water flows out, from there. So today, in 2022, if he had half a mind to fill it up and to dam it, then it would still be a lake. So the valley was a lake, right? And then people from all over would come here, and they would look at the Swayambhu hill and aspire to be able to approach that spot. But they couldn't, because of all the water. So the first monk that then dared, to do that is a person by the name of Manju Sri. Okay, so Manju Sri, with their hometown in Wutai San in China. So Wutai San was this ancient village from where Manju Sri came. So he walked along the ridge, could not approach Swayambhu, so kept on walking down, and then at the lowest point in the southern part, decided to cut this gorge, allowing the water to go out, right? And then he's able to approach the Swayambhu. So now the history of that is the people who came with Manju Sri then established the first human settlement in the Kathmandu Valley. And so that settlement, the first town in the Kathmandu Valley, would be called Manju Patan. So the first one, right? And he did not have any animals. He did not have any livestock. So people think that he brought a mythical, animal known as the Sardul. So that is why, in iconography, you always see Manju Sri riding on a lion-like animal, but with wings. And so would be sort of a Greek, African, Asian lion, but with wings. And so it is said that it is with these animals that he plowed the land for the first time. And the plowing took place in what would be present-day Thamel, was where the first agriculture, began, and hence the story of the valley would begin. So now, if you take history and you come to the present day, so when you walk around town, so imagine the town that you're walking in today is probably the 32nd city that has been built in that same spot. So how did that happen? Well, because there were earthquakes, there were natural disasters, man-made disasters, war, so all kinds of things, have created the city that we see at present. But all that history begins from here. So now imagine you cut the gorge, the water starts draining out, and Manju Sri comes here to this very spot and then prays to Swayambhu from this hill. So that's why this is known as the Manju Sri hill. And then we'll see the spot where, to that day, to the time of Manju Sri, the Buddha's statues were still not made. So remember, when we're walking through Patan, it's only in 78 AD, so almost 600 years after the Buddha passed away, that we started making statues of the Buddha, right? So the shrine to Manju Sri is here. Now, just to understand, Nepal today, if Manju Sri was the wise one, okay, and it says in the text that he cut the valley, the gorge, with his sword of wisdom. So wisdom being iconographed as a sword with which you cut through ignorance. So it is quite natural then to see a statue of Manju Sri holding a sword, because the artist translates that literally into the person with a flaming sword with which you can cut ignorance. So no matter what movies you watch, no matter what books you read, the sword is a symbol of the instrument or the tool with which you cut through ignorance, right? And so look behind you on the wall. You see all the chalk marks. So that's when children when they learn how to read and write, when the children learn to read and write, the first thing they do is come here and then try their hand, with the first letters that they learned, so that they get blessed by Manjusri on their academic quest. So the sword of wisdom. So don't think of it as a sword, but the sword of wisdom with which you cut through ignorance. Okay. So just saying, if you look around, you see the hills. Okay, and so the valley was a lake until Manjusri arrived at this spot, wanted to approach Swayambhu. So he walks all the way down to the southern end and then cuts a gorge. So today in 2022, if you build that gorge up, it will all still be water. So this is the spot from where the history of Swayambhu begins. Okay, so let's walk a little bit. With our Buddhist systems, so remember what we are talking about in Patan. So he takes his turn looking after this shrine, and he has to do that only for 7 days. And so today is the 7th day, so he'll be replaced by another member of the Sangha. Okay? So you see the empty niche there? So there will be no statues of the Buddha till about 78 AD. So what this means is that these shrines existed, before that, so before the time. Now, one thing that happens with conservation is that somebody is going to come and say, the statue must be stolen, so can I replace it? And so across the valley, there is a lot of systems whereby people are, making new statues and putting where it should be empty niches. And so the only thing that you find prehistoric in Swayambhu are the footprints of the Buddha. So when the Buddha was walking, people would make prints of his foot. And so people would then use footprints as the first, symbol of worship. Otherwise, the initial symbols are always empty niches. Right? So if you look behind, you see it's a Lokeswar. Now remember in Patan, what we were saying is that it is very easy to recognize a Buddha because his ears will be long and it will be empty. But when you see, a statue with long ears, but with exaggerated earrings, but with the lotus, you see the lotus growing up? Right? From the side, it's not very clear, but lotus. So Padma Pani Lokeswar. So the symbol of the lotus basically being that the person, and so try to remember these things, so was attached, went past their attachment, past the illusion, which is water, and then blossomed in ether, in emptiness. So Manjusri would then be celebrated as a Bodhisattva. So somebody who came here to also help end suffering by forfeiting their own journey to becoming a Buddha themselves. So the school of Buddhism where you want to become a Buddha yourself would be Theravada. The school where you would go back to bring everybody along would be Mahayana. And the school where you perform rituals would be Vajrayana. So the 3 schools. So then you also know that every Mahayana Buddhist would use this as a shrine. And how do you know that? Because you see the Padmapani Lokeswar. Okay? Just come around here. So it's very easy to recognize Manjusri because so you can see, the seating position, but then look at this sword. So that's the symbol then. So, colloquially you say that's the sword with which he cut the gourds. But, in fact, in the text, it would say, using his sword of wisdom. So, using the sword of wisdom. And then, if you look across these hills, there are many sacred sites on the hilltops. And so, these are people before Manjusri who came, decided not to approach Swayambhu and did their meditation on the hilltops and then they left. And so, each hilltop also has shrines, basically predating the time when Manjusri cut the gourd. Okay, so this is where it all begins. Let's walk back. Come. One of the things that we look at here is if you look at this stupa, so the story, is that, Swayambhu in those days was always described as a source of light. So, or light emitting, from the ground. Now the word Swayambhu, doesn't make any meaning because if you translate Swayambhu literally, then it just means, self-created or, spontaneously, emerging from the earth, Swayambhu. So if you ask a Newar, a local Newar, what does Swayambhu mean? Then they will say it is not Swayambhu, it is Swayambhu. So Swayambhu literally means it is a forest full of wooded plants. Right? And so if you look around, you can see it's all wooded plants. And so when Brian Hudson became the first resident ambassador in Kathmandu, he made a list of the plants in Swayambhu. So if you look at all the plants in the world, a list of all the plants, there are 92 plants, wooded plants, whose name ends in Nepalensis. And so Nepalensis would be endemic to Nepal. And 22 of those plants were identified just on this hill. So this hill has given 22 plants with Nepalensis, as the name. So the story is that Manjusri would have stood in this hill and prayed, and then as Bengal, as the areas south of Nepal began to go to war, there were skirmishes, there were conflicts, and so the rulers here were afraid that these areas might be damaged. And so it says that the flame or the light was covered by this original stupa. So the light was covered by this original stupa, and then later on, as kings became rich, as people became rich, they began to build bigger and bigger stupas. And so what they did was brought the original stupa to this site. So again, if you ask the local people, where do you perform your rituals in Swayambhu? It will not be at the main stupa, it will be here. Because this is the original stupa built, before it was expanded, in the present site. So the Newars, they have their feasts here, they have their rituals here. And so we have a land trust that looked after the Swayambhu. So when the earthquake happened, like families like me, we were the first ones here, taking care of everything. You can see everything has been repainted, everything has been redone. Can you see where the earthquake broke, that piece? You see the steel pieces on top?
Yes.
So that's an addition, to fix it after the earthquake damage. So that's from the 2015 earthquake damage. Okay. So I just want to show you, these two guys here. So if you come closer, right? So that's my grandfather, and this is his father, so my great-grandfather. And so their names, everything is written because they, look after the lot of the land. And so for families like me to come here after the earthquake to take care of it is just part of the family tradition, right? Because you keep the land trust that keeps these things going.
Yeah.
And so in the last 800 years, Swayambhu has been rebuilt 15 times. So 15 times in the last 800 years. And so these trusts become the key part of doing that. But my family, the family guild that I come from is the painting guild. And so the painting part would be done by the Chitrakars. So the stone by the Silpakars, the wood. So the 64 guilds would all contribute. But the land trust is looked after by the family. And so this is why these spaces are clean, nice, because this is where all the original rituals would be performed. So let's walk a little bit. But I want you to look at the forest, because it is out of this forest that 92 plants have been named. Out of that, 22 were found only on Swayambhu.
And the Tibetan name is also Pakpe Shinkun.
There you go. So you just explain that.
Yeah, the Tibetan name of Swayambhu, Pakpe Shinkun, means all the precious plants. So Shing is like tree,
Shing.
like wooded tree, like you said, and Kun is all Shinkun.
So Newari Swayambhu. So wooded plants, forest. So if you go to Changgu, then
Shinkun, yeah, it's the same, right?
Changgu
It's the same, yeah.
is Chaswanggu, Saap ko jungle. So forest full of sap plants. Changgu, Shinggu, Swayambhu.
Yeah. It's like,
The Tibetan source of translation was the first one to name them, and then send the samples to the London Museum, where all the original, the documentation is kept. But the British, they had a way then of naming them, and because these plants couldn't be found anywhere, so their surname, the plant's name, is Nepalensis, or endemic to Nepal. Yeah. What would it mean if you see a pine forest? So pine forest is where only if you have degraded soil and nothing can grow, then the pine comes up. So the moment you see pine, it's a new forest. But if you see oak, so like Lord of the Rings, oak trees, so oak would be climax. So the last species that would evolve in any fertile forest would be oak. And so you watch, this jungle is full of oak.
So it's very old.
Yeah. So this is what inspires movies like one of the Lord of the Rings, the wise oak. Like I said, in the last 800 years, has been restored 15 times. Okay, so out of those 15 times, one of them was when the entire hill was destroyed by the Sultanate of Delhi. The Sultanate of Delhi. And so the Sultanate of Delhi marched into Kathmandu in 1349. And so there are parts of Kathmandu when you walk around, where they are selling beads, where they are selling jewelry. And so it says that the invading Muslim army, from Delhi, they came here, they did not conquer, but they didn't go back either. So they decided to continue to live in Kathmandu. So after the destruction, Swayambhu was redone, but all the broken pieces that came from the stupa was basically put together in this particular stupa and then rebuilt. Now, when you hear stories like this, it stays in your mind, because in 2015, when the earthquake destroyed Swayambhu again, and we were building it, nobody would allow anything to go out. So even today, it's all put into the ground, so that in future earthquakes or future, it'll always be as a reference. So if you want to know or see the broken pieces, from the 1349 destruction of Swayambhu, it is all housed in this one stupa. Okay. Now the trees I was mentioning, so look this way. So you can easily recognize the oak tree, right? So the oak tree down there is a climax forest. So it just shows how old this site is. But I want you to look at these two trees. Look at the one in the front. Does anybody know what this is called? This tree right in front. So it's called the monkey's puzzle. And so there are many monkeys. And so imagine the joke. In 1850, when the Prime Minister of Nepal went to England, to visit, and they must have been shown a plant called the monkey's puzzle. And then somebody must have, come up with the idea, let's put it in Swayambhu and see if monkeys climb. Right? And so these were all introduced on the Swayambhu hill after the Prime Minister's 1850 visit to the UK. Right? So even trees have their history, every monument has their history. Right? So it's full of this original, sort of history that Kathmandu has. But look at the forest. So those are oak. So if you see pine, then you know it's a very new forest. But if you see oak, then you know it's a very ancient forest. And hence down the hill, there is a natural history museum that then captures all this natural history of this place as well. Okay, slowly, let's move on. While we wait, I want you to look at these. So you see how old the stone is, and then can you see how new this is? And so this is brand new. So this is brand new. Now when the earthquake moved, right? So can you imagine what the earthquake felt like? It was very smooth. It was like, in being in Disney World on that boat. What do you call that boat?
Yeah, I know the one.
It's a very irritating ride, but so it was very smooth. So it wasn't very destructive. And so in my house, so the flower pots, they would go round and round, and then they would fall. Very smooth. So when I came up here, very interestingly, all these were doing the same thing, but all of this had fallen. Right? So they were all in part of the debris. Now, the second day, there was a lot of security. So police, army, everything. But the first day, a lot of things could have been lost. So in the debris, when we were sieving through, we never found these. Right? So these tops. And so as we were putting things back, there would be people walking and say, I would like to pay for this one. Right? So as we were doing it, and the earth was still moving. So all these were replaced, as the earthquake was happening. So it's very interesting that later on, people are going to wonder, how come this is so worn out and this is brand new? And so this is 2015, and these could be 2,000 years old. But look at the process of how this happened. So do you see the cement here?
Yeah.
So that's a very bad restoration, but at that time we thought that was the best thing we could do. So in order not to lose this piece, let's put it back. And so you can see, how things were all put back in 2015, and the earth was still moving, as we were doing this work. But look and see the distance. I don't think all of them were lost. I have a feeling people put it in their pocket and took it. Because we were able to find a lot of things, but not these pieces. Come, let's go around here.
No.
This particular shrine, and so this is where Santipur, so Santikar Acharya would have been a Bengal king who came to Kathmandu and then converted himself into Buddhism and became the first real builder of this place. Now, if you look at iconography, right? So remember, Ashok, hosted the third Buddhist council meeting in the 3rd century BC. So if you look at the iconography, it could not be more than 2300 years old, right? But somewhere in between, so this shrine was built, and so every Buddhist institution in the Kathmandu Valley, so they belong to this institution. Okay, now I just want to describe, because it's closed and it's not accessible to everybody. So once you enter that door, there is the first chamber. And so the first chamber has wall murals. And the murals are painted like a comic book serial. And so the first picture is the valley as a lake. And then the last picture is contemporary Nepal. So if you want to write the history of the Kathmandu Valley, it's all painted on the wall. Now what happened in the 2015 earthquake is that the wall, it all fell. And so what that means is all the plaster fell. And then you could see what had been painted in 1934, what had been painted in 1833. And very interestingly, I was able to go to my cousins, and they had the pencil drawings from the last time our grandparents painted it in 62 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So pencil drawings. And so that is the kind of restoration. Now the question would be, should we make the last two pictures with the royal massacre? Should we put the the transition into the republic? Because 100 years from now we may not be able to say these stories. So it is very important to paint them on the walls, because that is the original history of the Kathmandu Valley. And so that's the first chamber. Now when you go inside, there is a second chamber which we are not allowed to go. So only the priests and the ruler of this country can go in. And so what we are told is that inside there is a book, text, and the text is written in the blood of snakes. So it says literally written in the blood of the snakes. And so if there was a drought in the Kathmandu Valley, then the priests of Musum Bahal and the ruler at the time needs to go in. They need to retrieve this book and then take it to the city. And in the city there is a well called the Barabir Barsa Inar, so 12-year well. So this is a well that is cleaned every 12 years. So you clean the well and then you recite the book. And then you recite the book until it starts raining.
Wow.
And so this was done not very long ago. So around, Mahendra Gopala, so 18 saal, about 60 years ago was the last time the book had to be retrieved. So you're living in Bodha, and you will recall that Bodha was also built when there was a very long famine, a very long drought. And so whenever the Kathmandu Valley has faced a drought, you have to go inside, retrieve that book, take it to the city and read in front of this well until it rains. And so it's a very important shrine, for the people. And so it is locked. It doesn't look very important, but it's the most important, shrine in the Kathmandu Valley for the Newars here. All the Bahals, all the Bahis would belong to this way. So this would be like the original. Now iconography, remember the Buddha whose hand is touching the earth?
No,
So which way is he facing? So you will be facing east. So this would be east. Because the Bhumi spots of Buddha would always face east. Right? So look at the ears, long ears and empty. So long because 29 years of wealth, empty because he renounced everything and then started 6 years of meditation. Right? So it's not a very nice image, but that would be from the 18th century. Ranwada Sako Palama. So it's about 18th century Buddha. Let's go. Those main stupa. So I just wanted to remind you again the same thing here. So if you look at these smaller ones are known as the chaityas, and you see the empty niches. So all those with the empty niches would predate the 2nd century. Right? So these are very old. Now I want you to look at the main stupa. So the Swayambhu stupa, and then the Harati temple. So if you look at to the right, then that's called the Harati temple. So the first thing, you remember if you went, when we went to Patan, we discussed the Buddhist text, right, the Pragya Paramita, and so it has 5 chapters. And so the first chapter tells you how to try and see the world without any form. So to see the world without any form. Okay. So the earth that we are standing in is earthly and has form. So the dome represents water. So water doesn't have a form of its own, but it will take the shape of the container that it is in. If you look at the pinnacle, it represents fire. So you can feel the fire, but fire doesn't have a form of its own. And then if you look at the level where the prayer wheels are tied, that is the wind. Okay, wind, you can feel the wind, but it has no form. And then the pinnacle is emptiness or ether. So if you can train yourself for the rest of your life to go from the earth to water, to fire, to wind, to ether, then you can see the transition from form to formless. Okay. Now if you read Western literature, then the most you will see is the description of the 4 elements. So if you look at Da Vinci Code, if you look at the history of Rome, so it's always 4 elements. And so it says Einstein was trying to prove the existence of ether, the 5th element, and then what did he discover while he was trying to prove the existence of ether? So tell me, what did Einstein get his Nobel Prize for in 1906?
Relativity?
Good guess, no. That's a popular guess, relativity. What did Einstein get his Nobel Prize for in 1906?
The energy formula?
E is equal to mc squared? No. So he was trying to prove the existence of ether when he discovered the photoelectric effect. And so his Nobel Prize is for the photoelectric effect. So today, why does your mobile phone or why does your TV remote work? Despite the fact that there is nothing between the remote and the TV.
Photoelectric
So
effect?
it's the 5th element.
Okay. Wow.
So if you can see the world without any form, then you can make discoveries like the mobile phone. Right? So the emptiness of form is something that you need to train your mind. And so Buddhism has these 5 elements, described in the text, 2,600 years ago. Okay, so let's get closer and see. Come. This way. Remember, it was all gone.
Yeah, it's so amazing.
Yeah. So 33 of these houses were destroyed. Now they were destroyed meaning completely, and so the monastery was gone, all these houses were gone, and so we came up with a plan that the facade should look like one unit. But if you look across, can you imagine these houses belong to 33 people? So from the front it looked like one house, but inside it is divided into 33 homes. And so this is one of those projects where I have to be signing a lot of things. And so the money was raised by the Karmapa. And so the Karmapa said, I will raise the money if you will do it. And so I stayed in his board to complete this work. And then also this monastery. Right? So these things actually fell off the hill during the earthquake. Now just from this area, so 2 weeks into the earthquake, we removed 92 trucks full of precious objects. And so a lot of them still have to be put back even today. But for a casual visitor, it will look like most of the things are back, but it's not back yet. Okay? So what you see is, if you look inside the houses, you see how small the houses are. So each is a private, space, but the houses don't belong to them. So just try to understand the arrangement is that they can live in that house until they perform the daily rituals for Swayambhu. So it is related to the function that they have with the stupa. So when they do not, So like him, look at him. And where? So he's performing his ritual, so he gets to live as long as he does that. If he stops that, then he doesn't belong to them. So it's a very strange arrangement. It's right there. Baba. So this particular monastery has a lot of importance, not very ancient, but it was built around 1952-53, and I was really surprised after the earthquake, because we had to go through all the documentation. So can you imagine that for the building of this particular monastery, which is dedicated to peace, so it was in celebration of the fact that the Asian countries had come together to celebrate peace, and so the donations included Chow En-lai, the Prime Minister of China, and Rajendra Prasad, the President of India. I was really surprised to see the donors list. But this whole piece had gone over, and so we had to demolish everything. So we had to take a lot of precious objects out of here. And so just imagine the surprise when we broke this statue down. You can see the pieces. And so just wanted to explain how this happened. Right? So first of all, I was, some monks came to my house and they gave me the keys to this. So I called our network of artists, and we came up here, we opened it, and so it's quite dilapidated. And then we looked at the inscription. Okay, the inscription said very clearly, Kuber Singh Sakya of Thaina. And so I was able to know exactly that this person has a grandson in Patan, so Rajkumar Sakya. And so I brought him, and we started dismantling, these precious objects. And so as we dismantled, like for example, the earth is still moving, right? And so he's cutting the rivet. And I would ask him, how do you know where to cut? And he said, that's exactly how my grandfather would have done it. And that's how we were taught. So this tacit knowledge about how to dismantle and redone. So as we started removing from this, look at the surprise we had when out of this statue, can you imagine we took down 17 sacks of precious documents, books, stored inside the statue. So then we found out that every statue contained books, documentation. And so we took it down, it's now down in the monastery being scanned. And so the work of putting these things back up is still, there. Now another thing we also did was, you see those stones like in his forehead? So can you imagine replacing all the original stones with fake? Because of the danger of it being stolen. And so we had to remove a lot of precious objects. And so we'll put in fake. And someday when we do the original piece, we'll put the original back again. So it's a lot of work. But at least the structures are now all back in place. But the inside still needs to be done. And so this is already the 7th year after the earthquake. So the recovery itself was quite quick. But the restoration, a lot of work still remains. And it's very easy to recognize that sword, right? You see the flaming sword? Remember what I was telling you about the lamps? So the lamp uses churi, which is a tree butter. And so the ritual of burning those lamps basically signifies that with one lamp you can light many other lamps. And so that's how the teachings of the Buddha will spread from one person to the other. But impermanence, as in the butter will run out. And so it's not like I can do this forever. Right? And so it's very profound when you think of rituals and why they have lasted so long. They're very symbolic. Right? If you come here early in the morning, and so it's good to encourage you if you can come up, like 4:45 or 6. Place is full of people singing hymns, right? Hymn. And so everybody comes up in the morning, and so you see this big donation box. So it's very interesting that they serve you tea and some bread, as a refreshment. Yeah, but and so what you do is, donate for that cup of tea that you had, right? So it's such a nice. It's really interesting how beggars tell you what to do, right? And this is, a real problem in the world. And I don't listen to my professor. I don't listen to anybody. I have a mind of my own. I'm the one who has to give money and be told what to do. It's a very strange world. Yeah, Bosnia. So this is also completely, restored. But I want you to look at the name here. So Gyan Mala Bhajan. Okay. So Gyan Mala. So the Buddhist teachings, which have been converted into lyrics. And so it's the lyrics that help you to understand and keep up the tradition. And so every morning, if you come here, there is singing. And then if you come a little closer, look at all the paintings here. So again, just like the story I was telling you about the history. So you see the first picture there is Maya Devi giving birth to the Buddha. And so it's all serialized. And so every morning, you sing as many stanzas of the Gyanmala that you could. And then, they serve tea and some bread. And so that's what the, the box is for. But all this was completely damaged. Everything was damaged during the earthquake.
One of these was completely down, right?
Yeah, this one was completely gone.
This one.
Now. Because that would be very useful. Because, when you go, you'll see a lot of, inscriptions. And so after the earthquake, right, so what happens is when the earth is moving back and forth, so these stone pillars, they broke.
Oh my God, yeah.
You see that? Yeah. You see here? So I was able to get, prints of this and then get it translated. And it's very fascinating that it says that these bells have been installed in 1792, hoping that the sound of these bells will prevent the war between Nepal and China. And so the war did happen, but they were offered, to ring so that the sound would help prevent that war. Now, what is very fascinating is if you read the script here, it also says exactly what is the weight of the bell. It says exactly which artist cast this. And then it even says that the artist was paid 1,482 pieces of silver for casting this bell.
Wow.
Can you imagine how accurate the information is? But I think normally you would never look at it unless you had to restore it. And then you can see the dragons, and the influence there. But anybody who's interested in this very old Tibetan, I guess. Look at this.
Mantra.
But in the other one, you can see it more clearly. Remember, when you were walking around Kathmandu, a lot of the artwork, that you see, will be a copy of things that you see on Swayambhu. Copy meaning, they will be inspired by what you see here in Swayambhu. And so here is the Buddha at the age of 35, right? So this would be the Bhumi Sparsa Mudra. So at the age of 35, and the whole story is how many people were actually working to distract him away from his meditation. And so this is referred to as the Mara, or the distractions, and the steadfastness with which the Buddha had to meditate to get to enlightenment. Okay, so remember last time we discussed what would be the animal symbol for steadfastness? Which animal would symbolize steadfastness? Which animal do you think is steadfast?
Ox.
Ox is good. Another guess?
Elephant.
Very good. So come here. So which animals do you see?
Monkey.
So look here. So it's done quite logically, right, for people to understand that it's a symbolism, but the symbolism of steadfastness. So the hand touching the earth. And steadfast from what? From distractions. So the Mara, the distractions. So, can you guess in how many places the bell broke?
The bell.
No, the stone pillars. So it broke here, it broke here, it broke here. You see where it broke? So in the next earthquake, I think people are going to be very surprised because they're going to see steel rods. So what we had to do was drill 3 holes and put steel rods and then put the stone on top and then bound by the steel plate. So it's amazing how damaging the last earthquake was. And so it's really sad when you think that you have to fix it with steel plates. If you recall, so the 3rd Buddhist Council meeting was organized by Emperor Ashok, and it was organized in a place called Patliputra, so which is present-day Patna, which is the capital of Bihar state in India. Right? So the decision was to make 84,000 stupas, and so there was a lot of Greek influence in the way stupas were designed. Okay, and so to understand it very simply, you have to just understand plutonic shapes in mathematics. So in mathematics, what are the plutonic shapes? So plutonic shapes are those shapes which look the same from all directions. So for example, a cube is a plutonic shape. A sphere is a plutonic shape. A pyramid is a plutonic shape. So if you can imagine the Greek mathematicians putting a cube at the bottom, a sphere on top of it, and then a pyramid on top of it, and then you get the original shape of the stupa. And the mathematical models are important because then it allows you to replicate it many times. Okay? So you see, half a sphere, the pyramid, and the earth being the cube. Okay? So on top you see the 13 wheels, the 13 steps. So in the Mahayana text, those steps would be known as the bhumis. So Tetra Dasa Bhumi means the 13 steps that you need to take in order to become a bodhisattva. So the first step is the joyous step. So the fact that you're on the path taught by the Buddha makes you happy. So the first ring is joy. The second ring is where you empty, the biases that you have. The third step is filling it in with the dharma, with the teachings. So it's very simple steps, but if you look at each step, it will tell you how to get from your normal life to actually being on the path that the Buddha taught. So the 13 step path. Now it's not 13 steps everywhere. Sometimes you'll see 10, sometimes you'll see 7. So depending on the person, who's studying, who's aspiring, so it doesn't have to be exactly 13 steps. But for many Kathmandu Nevars, we would use 13 steps. Okay, let's keep going on. I think was a very unique, case during the earthquake, because when the earthquake happened, so if you look behind you, so this structure actually fell, and so there was nothing left of it, and it's been rebuilt. But this one in the front, it actually burst. So it's very difficult to describe, how a temple will actually burst, and inside were basically tens of thousands of Buddha statues made from clay. So handmade clay statues, which had been stored, and then when the earthquake happened, it burst. And so every piece was sieved through, put back in, and then completely restored. So, you just Google and look at, Swayambhu after 2015 earthquake, and you will really appreciate, the work that has been done. You saw it.
Video of the earthquake. There's one video, so much of doing it.
Yeah. So it's just amazing how everything has been put back up. Now I want you to see those 3 pillars there, and so those 3 pillars, just collapse. So now tell me, in human history, how many machines have human beings invented?
Millions.
You think?
No.
Machines. So the fundamentals of machines, how many fundamental machines do we have in the human history? It's only 3. So the first is the pulley. The second is which one?
Lifting?
Pulley. So with the pulley you can lift. So what is the second machine?
Gear? A gear?
No. Very good. So inclined plane is the second machine. Chocolate for you. Now what is the third one? Is the lever. Can you imagine how smart human beings are? We've come up with 3 machines so far. So inclined plane, lever, and the pulley. So people always ask, how will you put these pillars up? And we say by using 3 machines. And so when we dug around, very interestingly, it was on an inclined plane. In fact, the base of the pillar is cut as an inclined plane. And so when you did this plane and this plane, it was easy to put it up. So it's not complicated. But if you understand the evolution of human beings and our machines, so by using very simple techniques, you could put them all, back up again. But the ones that broke, again, can you see the steel plate? The steel plate and the steel rod had to be put in. So it was quite a bad earthquake. Enough to break these stone pillars. Just walk a little bit. This one, so that's for our great-grandfathers. And so their names are written here. Okay, so this would be the year 1003, so which is about 300 and 24 years ago. So about, I don't know, 9 generations of my grandparents. And so they would have contributed, these shrines. And so the year is also written and the name is also written. And so it's a very easy way, to tell who built this, because after the earthquake, it was easy to go after everybody and say, did you know that your father or your grandfather, put up this bell? And on that bell, it says exactly that the bell weighs 8 dharnis. So that's about 16 kilograms. And the family donated this many rupees, for this. And so if you knew the family, you could call them and say, we are restoring the bell that your family put up. Would you like to pay for it? And the families were more than happy to pay for it. So to think that in 2015, all this restoration were paid by the same families that contributed 300 years ago, 2000 years ago, doesn't. So that tradition, I think, is the most precious thing. So it's not just fundraising, but going back to the families who put it and then coming back. Now look at this one here. You look at the steel plate. So those are going to be 3 really large steel rods that come up next time. So come this way. Look to your left, to your right here. So this is known as the temple dedicated to Bharati. Okay? And so you can see a lot of Indian pilgrims. But if you come here early in the morning, every parent who has a young child, will be here. And the reason is, if you remember the story from the Chitrakar, where the Buddha is approached by a mother with a dead child. And so the mother says, can you bring my child back to life? And so the Buddha says, yes, get me some mustard seeds from a house where nobody has died, because I need to sprinkle it on the child, and the child will come back to life. So the child doesn't come back to life. The mother goes from house to house trying to get mustard seeds and finds out from every family that somebody has died. Right? So that is the story, but it says very clearly in the text that there was realization that these children were dying because of communicable diseases. So this temple is dedicated to protecting your child from communicable diseases. And so even today, if you had a COVID vaccination campaign and you put a picture of this temple on your campaign, everybody will line up, because people understand exactly what it means to protect your child against communicable disease.
Wow.
So, it's already in the face that there are diseases and there are ways. But if you mix the culture and the medicine together, then it becomes very effective. So that's what everybody is doing. If you come here early in the morning, you'll see every mother with a child, doing their rituals here. Right? So I guess in the West you would call that hedging. You hedge. So vaccine plus the super power. Hedging. And you can see it's a very old statue, so 7th century it says. And so this would be the time when the Guptas was ruling in India. And so the Guptas were the ones who translated a lot of the old Pali, text into Sanskrit. And so the reason why we have a lot of Buddhism in Sanskrit is because of the Gupta, period and its influence in South Asia. And so this would be a statue from that period. And so you can still see, do you see the Greek influence? So remember the toga? Look at the afro hair, look at the ears. So it is done in that style. And so the older the statue, the more Greek it looks. The younger the statue, the more Nepali or Newari it begins to look. But the older statues would be more Greek-like. And you can see the use of toga. So 7th century, and that would be Gupta period. Okay? So let's just walk back a little bit, because it's going to be a long time very soon. And so in Buddhism you would say,